What's up YouTube, welcome to CodAffection. In this tutorial we will discuss how to implement ASP.NET Core MVC CRUD operations without using Entity Framework Core. We have connected to the SQL Server without Entity Framework and we have implemented all of these operations using stored procedure. Previously I have already implemented CRUD operations in ASP.NET Core MVC with Entity Framework Core. There will be an article on the same topic. You could grab code from there as well. All of the links will be there in video description. You could check that from there. Without further ado, let's get started with this topic. Here is my Visual Studio 2019. First of all, we have to create an MVC project in ASP.NET Core. So click on this create new project here. Now let's create an ASP.NET Core web application. I will name this project as MVC CRUD without Entity Framework. Then select the location where you want to save this project. Click on create. Now select this MVC template here. I will uncheck this option for HTTPS, which is not required for development environment. Click on create. So here is our brand new MVC application. Now let's look how to implement the CRUD operations without Entity Framework inside this ASP.NET Core application. For that, first of all, let's create an SQL Server database here. Here is my management studio. Now let's create a new database. To implement CRUD operations inside this application, we'll be dealing with details of book like book title, author, price, etc. So I will name this DB as booksDB. So here is our new database. Inside that, let's create a table for books. So right click on it, then table. Let's add required columns into this table. Book ID, which is of the type int, title as waka 100, then author, which is also waka 100, and finally we have the price column, which is of the type integer. Now let's set this book ID column as the primary key. Now we have to apply the identity specification for the same column, book ID. So with this book ID column selected, go to column properties here, then under identity specification, set isIdentity as yes, so that we don't have to insert values into this book ID column here. SQL Server will take care of that. It will start from 1 and incremented by 1 upon new record insertion. To create this table, click on this save icon here, or you can use the shortcut Control S as books. Click on OK. So here is our new table, books. Now let's look how to implement operations like insert, update, delete, or retrieve from our ASP.NET Core application without Entity Framework. So back to the project here. First of all, I'm going to create a view model for the table that we have just created. So let me create a new class, book view model. Now let's add properties corresponding to this table column here. First of all, we have the primary key, which is book ID. Then we have the title, which is of the type string. Let me copy this and paste that below. Author. And finally we have the price property. So here we have a view model, which is not a model that we used to have in our Entity Framework Core. We are not going to use Entity Framework Core inside this application. Then why do we need this model class here? As per the naming convention itself, ViewModel classes are only used for designing view files inside this application, with which we can send data from our action method into corresponding view files. You could see that in a bit. Now let's create a corresponding controller inside this controllers folder here. So right click on it, then add controller. For this MVC project, we have 3 scaffolded items available here. First of all, we have this empty template. It will just create a controller class with the provided name. With the second method here, read or write action methods, it will create a corresponding controller with action methods for all of the CRUD operations, but there won't be corresponding view files. If you also want to include view files for the corresponding action methods, you can use this second method here, but there is a problem. We have to be using Entity Framework. If we use any of these first 2 methods here, there should be a lot of work to be done. The created action methods will be empty and there won't be corresponding view files. All of them will be automatically added with this third scaffolded item here. To avoid the extra works, I will select this entity framework scaffolded item. In here, we have to provide the model class. For that, we can pass this ViewModel book ViewModel here. If you know how entity framework works, you know that data context class is a must in entity framework. But in this project, we are not going to use entity framework core. We are creating MVC controller using this entity framework scaffolded item to avoid extra works. To achieve that, we have to do some tricks here. First of all, the model class must have a primary key. So first of all, let's set the primary key for this book ID here. So here it is. We just need to add this attribute key here. We are just adding this attribute just for the sake of the scaffolded item template. Now let's create the controller. Add controller. Select this template for entity framework. Model will be book ViewModel. To create this controller with this scaffolded template, we will create a dummy data context. For that, you just need to click on this plus button here. Click on add. Let's name this controller as book controller. Click on add. As you can see here, it is currently installing NuGet packages for entity framework core. We are just using that for creating the MVC controller easily. Finally, here we have the book controller. Inside that, we have all of the action methods for all of the CRUD operations that we have to implement. For the corresponding controller action methods, you could see the views folder here: create, delete, details, edit, and index. And the dummy data context class is created inside this data folder here. Don't worry, we are not going to use this data context class, which is just added for the sake of scaffolding process. If we were using these two first scaffolded methods here, we have to create all of these views from scratch, and also the controller action methods here will be empty. Now we just need to modify these action methods and view files as per our requirement. As part of creating this controller, there is one more modification inside this startup class here, which is the dependency injection for the database context class. You could see this function add DB context, which is not required when we are not using entity framework core. So let me remove that from here. Now inside these views files here, we don't need these two view files, create and details. Let me remove that from here. We will be retrieving all of the records from books table and displaying that inside this index view here, and inside this view edit. Actually, I want to rename that like add or edit. So inside this views file here, we will be designing a form for both insert and update operation. And we will be displaying this delete view here just for confirming the delete operation. Just saying, are you sure to delete this record, to get the confirmation from user side. We can discuss that in a bit. Now back to the controller here. All of the action methods inside this controller are using entity framework for database interaction, which we have to replace with the conventional ADO.NET interface. As part of the entity framework, here we have the constructor parameter for the dependency injection. So let me remove that from here. We don't need that for this application. We need this index action method, and since we are not using the entity framework, we can avoid this async keyword from here, and we don't need this wrapping with this task. Now we will just return the index view. We don't need this details action method, and also these action methods for create, both get and post. So let me remove all of them from here. For this view here, add or edit, we will be modifying this action method edit as add or edit. Let's remove these async keyword from here. For now, let me remove existing entity framework codes from here. For now, we will just return the view here. Now here we have the add or edit action method of the type post. Let's remove this async keyword from here. Let's remove these entity framework codes. Let's keep this as simple as possible. And finally, here we have the action methods for delete, both get and post. Okay, let's remove existing entity framework codes. We don't need this method here. Now let's remove this async keyword here. So that's all about the action methods. Now let's implement ASP.NET Core CRUD operations with stored procedures. First of all, I'm going to design a form for inserting a new book record. For that, we can make use of this action method add or edit of the type get. For that, we have to make the URL like this: book/add or edit. For an insert operation, we just need this. The URL routing of this application is already mentioned inside this startup file here. The first word after the domain name will be treated as the controller, and the default value for the controller will be home. After that, we have the action method with the default value index. Value after this action method will be treated as the value of the ID parameter. So that's how this URL works. The controller name is book, so book / then the name of the action method add or edit. In case of an update operation, we will be passing an ID, something like 5. We can access the same with this ID parameter. We will discuss that once insert operation is done. For now, let's look how we can return a fresh form for inserting a new book record. Inside the action method, we have this return statement with the view function. So it will look for a view file with the same name as that of the action method add or edit, which is here. First of all, you could see that this view accepts a model of the type book view model. So from this action method, first of all, I'm going to create an object of book view model here as book view model is equal to new book view model. Now let's pass the same inside this view here. So currently this object is a fresh instance of book view model. With that, we can design the form here without changing anything inside this view file here. Let me save all of these modifications here. Let's run this application without debug mode. So go to debug, then start without debugging. So this is how the fresh MVC home controller looks like. As per the default routing inside this application, this home controller will be loaded with the index action method. Now let's look how this add or edit view looks like. For that, we have to use this URL here /book add or edit. Boom. So here we have a fresh form to insert new books into the application. Now let's start modifying this application as per our requirement. Inside this view file here, we have a form along with 2 headings. You could see the same here. Along with that, you could see the navbar and the footer here. Now where does that come from? It's already designed inside this global layout page inside this shared folder _layout.cshtml. So all of these HTML decoration with navbar and footer will be there in all of the views throughout the entire application. Inside this global layout, you could see that this title is set from this view data with this property title. We have passed the value for this title from each of these views files here. You could see the same inside this add or edit here. We have set that as edit. Since we are going to use the same view for both insert and update operation, I want to change this title based on the context of operation. So I will pass the value for this title property conditionally. So we can do this models. As you know, inside this model object, we'll be having this model view object that is passed from this get action method here. From that, we can check this property book ID. If its value is 0, so in that case, I will be returning this create book, else update book. So this property title will be replaced in place of this view data title here. So that is what we are seeing inside this tab title here. I want to show the same property inside this h1 tag here. So we could do this view data. Inside that we have this title property. Now we don't need this h4 element here. Let's build this project again. After successful build, back to the application, reload the page. Now when we submit this form here, it should be posted into this action method add or edit of the type post. We have to mention the same inside this form attribute ASP action here. Currently it is edit. Instead of that, we have to pass add or edit. Now when we submit this form, it will reach up to this post action method add or edit. Inside this action method, we have to implement insert or update operation based on the value of this ID parameter here. Before that, let's implement validation inside this form. For that, we can start with this ViewModel here. These two properties, title and author, are required properties inside this ViewModel. So let's specify that with this attribute required. Let me copy this and paste in here for author also. Don't be afraid that we are not using entity framework. These attributes are related to the validation of model or view model. Now we have to add one more validation for this price control here. The value inside this control must be greater than or equal to 1. So we can specify the validation with this attribute range. So the price should be in between 1 and the maximum allowed value for integer. If there is an error while validating this property, we can set the error message here should be greater than 1 or equal to 1. So here we have the if statement with which we will check whether this form is valid or not. If it is not valid, we will return the same view with the view that we have passed from the form. Okay, now I want to change the form submit button text as submit instead of save. Let me save all of these modifications and build this project here. After successful build, back to the application, reload this page. To check the validation, let's submit this form without entering any of these fields here. Form is not valid because of these validation errors. You could see the error messages beneath corresponding input controls here. Now as you enter values into these input controls here, the validation errors vanishes. It's because of the client-side validation present inside our MVC application, which is already there mentioned inside our view file add or edit here. Inside this section, it loads this script here underscore validation scripts partial.cshtml. Inside that, it loads jQuery validate scripts from this www root file here. So these scripts will be rendered in this section, script section, which is mentioned inside the global layout view here, scripts. So this section is not required for all of the views. If there is a script section in child views like add or edit, it will be loaded in place of this line here. And thereby inside MVC forms like this, we are able to implement client-side validation also. So all of these validations will be checked from client-side itself without posting this form into our server. Okay. Now form as a whole is valid. Now we can submit this form into corresponding post action method, which is mentioned inside the form attribute ASP action here. Currently it is edit. We have to change that as add or edit. So this form will be submitted into this action method add or edit of the type post. Now inside this HTTP post action method add or edit, we have to handle both insert and update operation based on the value of ID. The value for this ID parameter will be same as that of the ID that we have passed with this get action method here. Based on the value of this ID, we can decide whether we have an insert or update operation. For that, first of all, we will be creating a stored procedure inside our SQL Server DB here. So here is my management studio. In order to create a stored procedure, let's expand this programmability here. Now right click on stored procedure, click on stored procedure here. So let's create this stored procedure for both insert and update operation. To save the time, I will be pasting the stored procedure, assuming that you are pretty confident about your skills on writing stored procedure. That's why you have chose this method over entity framework. So here is our stored procedure: book, add or edit. Here we have the parameter for this stored procedure. All of these parameters values should be passed from our action method. If book ID is 0, we will insert a new record into books table here, and inside the else part we will update the record with the given ID with new updated details. Now to create this stored procedure, click on execute here. Newly created stored procedure can be seen inside this stored procedures folder here. So here it is: book, add or edit. Now before calling this stored procedure from our action method, let's create all of the stored procedure related to books table here. Now let's create a stored procedure for retrieving all of the records from this books table here. So let me create a new stored procedure. I have already prepared the scripts. Let me paste that here. So here we have the stored procedure book view all. Inside that we have executed this SQL query select start from books. To create this stored procedure, click on execute. Now let's create another stored procedure for retrieving a given book record. So here it is: book view by ID. Here we have the SQL query to retrieve a given record with the given ID. So far we have created 3 stored procedures. Now let's create the final one for deleting a record with a given ID. So here it is: book delete by ID. Here we have the corresponding SQL script. Click on execute. So that's it. We have created all of the stored procedure required for implementing CRUD operations inside our ASP.NET Core MVC application. Now back to the Visual Studio here. Now inside this add or edit action method, let's execute this stored procedure book, add or edit. For that, first of all, we have to configure the connection string inside this application. It should be mentioned inside this app settings JSON file here. Here you could already see a connection string which is added as part of creating this book controller using the entity framework scaffolding item. We are not going to use this connection string here. Instead of that, we will add a new connection string here, dev connection. First of all, we have to specify the instance name of the SQL Server, and with this database we have to provide the corresponding database name, which is booksdb. Since we are using local authentication, we have set this trusted connection as true. In order to execute multiple query batches, we have set this property multiple active result sets as true. Now that's all about the DB connection string. Now from this action method, we have to execute this stored procedure book, add or edit. How can we do that when this connection string is specified inside app settings.json? If we were using entity framework core, we will be injecting the DB context class into this controller, and rest of the action method can make use of that to interact with the DB. There are different ways to access the connection string or the corresponding DB provider interface in our controller here. In this application, we will be using this simple method. By default, inside this startup class here, this I configuration is already added into this startup file here. Through this I configuration property, we can access this connection string here. So inside all of the MVC controllers, we are going to inject that I configuration in our controller constructors. So we just need to do this I configuration as configuration. So whenever we make a request into MVC controllers, corresponding controller class instance will be created, and the same time this constructor will be executed. The value for this constructor parameter will be passed from this startup class here. Now to save this configuration, we are going to create a private property inside this controller. For that, you could use this shortcut. Just place the cursor on this I configuration here. Then you could see this light symbol here. Expand it Then select this option, create and initialize field configuration. So here we have the private property to save the injected configuration object. For private properties, I will be using this prefix underscore like this underscore configuration. We will update the same inside this constructor also. Now, rest of the action methods inside this controller can make use of this private property to access the configuration that we have saved here. Let's do that with this post action method here. First of all, we need an instance of SQL connection class. For that, first of all, we have this using statement here. As a resource for this using statement or using block, we have SQL connection as SQL connection, and here we are creating a new instance of the class SQL connection. Into that we have to pass the corresponding DB connection string that we can access from this private property configuration. Just call this function get connection string. Inside this function we just need to pass the name of the connection string that we have saved here, dev connection. Okay, you could execute SQL queries or store procedure without using this using block here, but if we use using blocks for C# class or instances which has the interface IDisposable, we don't have to destroy that object after using the instance. This using statement will take care of that. We just need to open this connection here and we don't have to close the connection. It will be automatically done by this using block here. First of all, let's open this connection. SQL connection.open function can be called. Now to execute this stored procedure, we can create an instance of SQL command here, SQL cmd, new SQL command. So that we have to provide the name of the stored procedure, which is book, add or edit. As a second parameter, we have to pass the SQL connection object. Just below that, we have to provide the type of the SQL command, which is stored procedure. So command type dot stored procedure. Now we have to pass values for the stored procedure parameters: book ID, title, author and price. For that we could do this parameters dot add with value function can be called. As a first parameter, we have to pass the name of the parameter, which is book ID. Without this @ symbol, just pass the rest of the name, book ID. We could pass the value from this book ViewModel object or parameter here. Now I have passed rest of the parameters values like this. Finally, to execute this stored procedure, we just need to call this function execute non-query. So this single stored procedure will take care of both operations, insert or update based on the ID that we have passed here. Corresponding to this book ID, inside this add or edit view, we have this hidden field here. And rest of the property value is coming from the corresponding input controls. After successful insert or update operation, we will be redirected to the index view, and we have already discussed about this form validation. If there is any error with the validation, the same view will be returned with the given book view model. If this operation is successful, this action method will be redirected to this index action method here. Inside that, we have returned this view index.cshtml. Inside this view, we have to retrieve all of the records from our table. This view is created with the entity framework scaffold item. So we have to make few modifications inside this view here. For now, I will just remove all of the lines of code which may cause the problem. So for now, I will just comment this table here. We can modify this view in a bit. For now, let me save all of these modifications here. Let's build this project again. I'm sorry for interfering. Let's get straight to the point. As a developer, you already know big projects or lengthy tutorials like this requires a lot of work and time in making. So here I'm asking for your little financial support. It will definitely motivate me to bring more and more helpful and quality free tutorials like this in front of you. Hope we can learn and grow together like this. Please check out various payment methods for donation from video description, or you could shop with our Amazon affiliate links without paying any extra penny. Back to the application, reload this form. In order to avoid this autocomplete or auto prediction from previously posted data, we can set this attribute for the form, autocomplete as off. To test the insert operation, let me add a new book into the table. So which is CodAffection. This is a must-read book for anyone who code. I have given links for such helpful books in all of my videos description under most recommended books. You could check that from video description. Now let's provide the author and finally the price. Now let's submit the form. Boom! Since we are redirected to index action method, hope everything went successful. Let's check that inside our books table here. Let's execute this select star statement here. So here we have the new book for code complete. Now let's look how to retrieve data from this table without using entity framework. For that, let's update this index action method here. First of all, we have to call this stored procedure book view all. Okay. For now, I will just copy paste this using statement from add or edit. Instead of SQL command, we need SQL data adapter as SQL DA. And here we have to pass the name of the stored procedure, which is view all, book view all. Let's pass SQL connection as a second parameter. Now we'll set the command type here, SQL DA. Since we have a select command, we can set the command type with this property select command. Command type is equal to command type dot stored procedure. Now to save the records retrieved from this stored procedure, we need a data table. So data table as dtbl is equal to new data table. Now to fill the retrieved records into this table, we just need to call the function fill from SQL data adapter. Now we will pass the same into our index view here. Now with this data table, we have to display retrieve records inside our index view here. So first of all, at the top, we have to specify the model type here. Model as system.data.data table. I will set this title as list of books. I will set the same inside this h1. So I will paste that here. Now in order to add some styles to this header, I will be using this class from Bootstrap, which is Jumbotron. Let's enclose this header with this Jumbotron div here. To sender this header, we can add this class text sender. Now let's uncomment this table here. Let's add one more class from Bootstrap for this table borders. And we want to set a background for this table header. So thead light can be applied here. Let's modify this table column header, book title, author, and price. Inside this final column, we will be showing these action buttons for edit and delete. And inside this header, I want to show this add hyperlink here. Let me cut this and paste here. Let's get rid of this paragraph from here. In order to insert a new record, we will be using this add or edit. So add or edit. Instead of this for each, we'll be using for loop. So we want to iterate this for loop as much as records inside the table. So model.rows.count. Now here we have to show the book title. For that we can do this model.rows, and the row index can be accessed from this I here, and then title property. Now let me copy this and pasting for rest of the columns here. This is for author and price. And here we have the final column for action buttons. We don't need these details here. For this attribute ASP route ID, we have to pass the corresponding book ID that we can access like this. Let me copy this and pasting here book ID. Let's pass the same here for delete button also. Let me save all of these modifications and build this project again. After successful build, back to the view, reload this page, boom. So here we have retrieved all of the records from our SQL Server table through stored procedure in our ASP.NET Core web application. If you want to add a new book, you can click on this create new button here. It will open up a fresh form to insert the book record. If you want to go back to the list, you can click on this back to list here. Let me add one more book here. This is another great book for developers from Robert C. Martin, Clean Code. Submit the form. That's it. Here we have added our second book also. Now, if you want to edit a record, you can click on this edit hyperlink here. With this hyperlink, we will make the HTTP request into this action method add or edit of the type get here. We are already using this action method for returning a fresh form for insert operation. Now to return a form for update operation with the given ID, we have to make few more modifications here. For that, first of all, we will be adding this if statement here. Inside that, we will check whether this ID is greater than 0 or not. If it is greater than 0, we have to return a form with a corresponding book details inside the form controls. For that, I'm going to define a separate method here. So here is the method fetch book by ID. For this function, we need a single parameter ID. And from this function, we just need to return a book view model. This function is not an action method, so we have to mark that with this attribute non-action. First of all, inside this function, I will create an object of the view model here. Inside this function, we just need to call this stored procedure here book view by ID. For that, first of all, I will copy paste the using statement from this index action method here. First of all, I will be creating a data table here dtbl. The name of the stored procedure is book view by ID. Let me copy the same from here. For this stored procedure, we have a single parameter book ID. So let's pass the corresponding value here. Select command dot parameters dot add with value book ID, and let's pass the ID here. For the proper order, I will just set the command type before passing the parameter value here. So by calling this fill statement here, the data table will be populated with the corresponding book record. For that, I will add this if statement here. First of all, we will check whether this data table has a single row only. So first of all, we have the book ID here. We can access the same from the data table dtbl dot rows. From the first row, we can retrieve the book ID. Like this, we have to populate 3 more properties. So let me copy paste this 3 times below. This is for title, author, price. Sorry, we forgot to call this toString function here to convert the same into corresponding string representation. Since both of these book ID and price are in integer, we have to convert this string into integer. So we can call this function convert to int 32. Let's call the same function for this price property also. And finally, from this method, we will return the book view model. Now we can call this function inside this add or edit action method here. Book view model is equal to fetch book by ID. Into the function, we just need to pass this ID parameter here. It will return the corresponding book view model for the given ID. And that object will be passed to this add or edit view here. Inside that, we have already designed the form for both insert and update operation. We don't have to make any change for this update operation inside the form. Now with this hyperlink here, we have to make the HTTP GET request into this add or edit action method here. For that, we have to update the corresponding hyperlink action method as add or edit here. Reload the page again. Now let's try to update this book record here. Boom. We have shown this header conditionally, and all of these form controls are populated with the corresponding record details. Now after making required changes inside these form controls, user can submit this form. This form will be submitted to the corresponding post action method add or edit here. Inside that, we have already handled both insert and update operation with this stored procedure book add or edit. Let's try the update operation here. In order to verify update operation is working for all of the columns inside the table, I will be adding this suffix asterisk marks to string properties, and the number of fields will end up with 2 zeros. Now let's submit the form. Boom. So here we have implemented the update operation with store procedure in this .NET Core MVC application. Now let's implement the final CRUD operation delete here. For that, here we have the get action method delete with a parameter as ID. For now, from this action method, we will just return this delete view here. Now into this view, we have to pass the book view model with the given ID. So we can do this. We can call this function fetch book by ID. Into that, just pass this ID here. Now let's pass the same object into the delete view here. Now let's look what we got inside this delete view here. I will change this title to delete book. I will show the same inside this h1 element here. With this view, we are just confirming this operation from user side. Are you sure to delete this record or not? This view is created based on book view model object. We have passed the same from this action method here also. So we don't have to make any of the modifications for these properties here. With this DL element here, we are just showing all of the properties values inside the view. If user want to confirm the delete operation, he just need to click on this delete button here. Let's look how this delete view looks like. Click on delete, boom. So here we have the view asking, are you sure to delete this record or not? If we click on this delete button here, it will reach up to this post action method delete confirmed here. The name of the action method is separately mentioned with this action name here. So we will be using delete as an action name for this method here. Like you can see here, action method is specified as delete. Now inside this action method, we just need to execute this stored procedure here, book delete by ID. For that, I will copy paste this using statement from add or edit post action method here. Book delete by ID. We have only one parameter, which is book ID, and we can pass that from this ID parameter here. We will execute the stored procedure with this function called here. After successful delete operation, the user will be redirected to this index action method here. Let's look whether it is working or not. After successful build, back to the application. Now once again back to the list, click on delete. Confirm the operation by submitting this form with this delete button here. Boom. Here we have successfully deleted the corresponding book record. So that's it guys. In this project, we have connected to SQL Server database without entity framework, and we have implemented all of the CRUD operations using stored procedure in ASP.NET Core MVC application. You could download this project source code from the GitHub link given below in video description. If you found this video helpful, please thumbs up this video, and for more awesome videos like this, please subscribe to our channel CodAffection. Please share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.